Hi, I am Dori Azar. In the video segment today, I am going to show you how we can create a payment gateway very quickly with the Calligraphy Quill framework. I am currently on the Calligraphy wiki page on GitHub. So this is the URL for it if you haven't seen any of the videos in the channel or on the documentation yet. And this documentation, it is a very exhaustive documentation of how calligraphy can get installed, can be used with a lot of tutorial videos and other prescriptions on how things could be done with calligraphy. The part that we're concerned with today is really about the payment. So I'm going to go to section 11 in the documentation, at least as of this video, that is called a Stripe and cryptocurrency payment. And we are going to be primarily concerned with how to do credit card payments and ACH payment through Stripe. So for those of you who don't know Stripe, Stripe is a service that facilitates online credit card payments and ACH credit card payments on top of any other mechanism of payments such as Google Pay, Apple Pay, and many others depending on which country you're building for. So Stripe is of course a third-party service that that integrates, or that we are going to be integrating with Calligraphy. In fact, it is integrated out of the box with Calligraphy, and what I'm going to show you today is how it could be quickly used to create the payment gateways that we would like. So let's, without further ado, let's go ahead and start with the tutorial for this video, and we are primarily concerned with the Stripe section. We are not in this video going to be talking about crypto payment just yet. Now with Stripe, there are multiple ways that we could use to initiate or to engage the user with a payment. I'm going to show you all the possible ways that Calligraphy allows you to do with the Stripe, and depending on your need, you can actually choose the method that is the most convenient for you. The first method is a very simple card payment without any authorization flow, which means very quickly all you need to do is just ask for the card number for an expiry date, expiry month, and then a CVC, and then you're all set to go. So I'm going to go ahead and show you this. This method is actually very interesting, specifically for US and Canada, just because some countries might have a different payment flows or different verification and validation flows. So if you don't want to get into the details of how it's done for other countries in a more scalable fashion, and you are primarily accepting credit cards in the US and Canada, then this might be a good method to use. Also, if you want to create your own form with your own styles, this also could be one that is convenient for you. So let's go ahead and see how this first method works. Now, of course, in calligraphy in general, in order for us to be able to do these type of transactions, the way it's done is by creating a controller. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm currently, by the way, in an installation of Calligraphy. It's not fresh. It's the one that we've been using in the tutorial video, so it might have some some features already in it. So I'm going to go to the controllers section within the application folder in the Calligraphy installation, and I'm going to create a new file, which is going to be a new controller file that we're going to use for all of our for everything that we're going to be doing together today. And just like any controller, I'm going to start it off by, of course, opening the PHP bracket, and by calling the namespace, or calling, the controller that comes out of the box with Calligraphy in order for us to use it. Now, this is very typical. So if you don't know what I'm doing in here, I advise you to go back and see some of the previous documentation or video tutorials on how to create controllers. All right, so controllers are typically classes. This particular one, we're going to call it payment controller, and it's going to be extending the out-of-the-box controller that comes with Calligraphy. Okay, And now one of our functions that we're going to be creating is the public function index. So that's the one that would be called immediately whenever this controller is invoked. Okay, so we don't need to append any action to it. And we're going to dedicate this functions precisely for this first method. Okay, so I'm going to call it method 1 for the time being, which is really a simple card. What we're going to be doing is I'm going to copy the whole code, okay, and then we'll explain it as we go. So I'm going to do it directly from there. And copy the whole thing and put it in this function. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go line by line. So the first thing that needs to be done typically in such a function is to activate the payment gateway that comes out of the box with Caligraphy, and that includes a Stripe already for us. Okay, and then just for the purpose of this tutorial, we're not going to create a form in this method. What we're going to do is we're just going to try and fetch the parameters that are inputted by the user, and those parameters are very basic. Those are the typical 5 for a simple credit card payment, and that would be the card number, that would be the month, the expiry month, the expiry year, and then the CVC code. So what this function is doing is actually requesting the parameters that will be entered, at least for the sake of this demo, as a GET request. So they will be appended to the URL, and then once the parameters are fetched and saved, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be calling the payment gateway that we just activated, and we're going to create a transaction that is going to charge to this card that we just created $10. Okay, so this method over here, create transaction, it actually takes the amount in cents. So $10 in cents would actually be 1,000 cents. Okay, all right. So let's this is really typically what our controller. And remember, there's no UI in this one, so we're going to do everything through the URL. So what we need to do is we're going to have to create a route. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. We're going to create on top of all of these a route over here, which is a get route. Remember, this is not ideal, but just for the sake of the demo today, we're not going to create a UI particularly for this method, but we're going to use just the parameters themselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the payment controller, and we don't have to specify any method because it's going to take the one by default. All right, so now we have a route. We have a route that takes us to the controller, which is gonna, apply this function, which, by the way, is immediately, if our parameters are correct, it's immediately going to charge, to charge the transaction to the card. However, we still have not told Caligraphy what account on Stripe to use, right? So we need a way to handshake with the Stripe service, and really the way it's done in the environment file, where there are some global variables that need to be defined or that need to be entered specifically for Stripe, and that is the payment in the payment. On the payment side of things, and it's called the pay public keys and the pay private keys. Okay, and we have one for the test environment and another one for the production environment. The one we're going to be using today is the test environment. Okay, so we're not in production, so we're going to be using the pair of keys that Stripe provides us with for our test server. So let's go to Stripe, and I have it already open in here. If you haven't used Stripe before, you will see it's very straightforward, but I would strongly encourage you to go through their help in order to understand how it works. I'm currently in the test mode environment, so I can immediately go and grab the API keys from there. And there is always a public key, which is the publishable key, and a secret key. So I'm going to start with the public key over here. I'm going to copy it and paste it into this environment, in my environment file. And I'm going to reveal my secret key very quickly, hide it back, and then put it in also in the .m file. Okay. Once you've done this, now it's almost set because we have all the credentials needed in order to transact with the API from Stripe. So now, ideally, if I go and I go to my route, so if I do localhost In this particular case, it's called My Calligraphy. Okay, that's the name of our application, and we're gonna do pay, and then we're gonna append to it, all these parameters that we need to bring to the function in order to create a transaction. So it would be the number, the expiry month, the expiry year, and the CVC. So I'm gonna say number, and the credit card that comes with the test credit card that Stripe offers, which is an information that we also find in the documentation, is 16 times or 4 times 42, 42, 42, all the way up to 16, okay? So 42, 42, 42, 42, 42, 42, 42, 42. I think I've got it. So this is 4, and this is 4, and this is 4, and this is 4, okay? So it's 42 repeated 32 times technically. All right, and then my second is expiry month, and that would be, and let's put any, any month, let's put December, and then expiry year, that would be, let's say any year in the future, and then we set CVC, okay? So CVC, and then let's put a three digits up there. And I'm gonna go ahead and press enter, and let's see what happens when I do that. All right, seems like we have some form of an error in here. Let's go and check it out, or maybe not, because we're not actually returning anything. So maybe it did work. What I'm gonna go do, and in order to validate, I'm gonna go back to my dashboard in Stripe, go to my home, and see if really a transaction happened of $10. And yes, if we look at here at 5:21, which is exactly right now, there is a transaction of I believe $10, $10 that was done. Okay, let's go see if we can see it in a different way, just to see the. So yeah, because I've done some transactions before. Is there a way for me to? Ideally, I'm hoping. Okay, let's give it a try over here. Okay, well, I can guarantee to you that it passed as $10. The best way to make sure that the transaction succeeded, I'm going to go ahead and dump. So I'm going to run another transaction now. I'm going to dump the output in order for us to see what the API returns for us on the screen. So I'm going to go back to my same URL. I'm going to press enter again, and now ideally I should display something on the screen. And this is what the API returns to us. Action success, it's true, and then the data, it gives us the confirmation of the charge itself. Now going back to my dashboard, ideally this should go up a little more to indicate that another transaction was done, and the gross volume should go up to $40 if it's really $10, an additional $10 that was charged. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. Okay, so at 5:23, there's a new transaction, and our gross volume went up to $40. Great, so that was the first method. Now, of course, what we've done here is just a controller. You can, on top of it, create a view, create a form, make it, of course, more user-friendly. And once you do all that, you can, switch. You no longer need to do it in a hacking way where you're actually passing the parameters through the URL, and it could potentially be done using a post request with Calligraphy. All right, so that was our first method. Now let's go see how to do the second method. And the second method is actually more straightforward because it's going to be using components from Stripe directly, and this method works pretty well for global payments. Okay, like this, you don't have necessarily to worry about the validation mechanisms of other countries. So if other countries or other financial institutions support 3D Secure or anything like that, it's handled for you automatically, and you don't have to worry about it. And it will be just a payment gateway for a card. Okay, that's what method 2 is about. So let's go ahead and see how we can show it in here. So I'm going to create another one for method 2, which is really the global card payment. Okay, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to call it function, and we're going to call it pay card or something like that. Okay, pay card. It doesn't matter what the name is. It's just for us to recognize it. And then I'm going to copy exactly what's in here, the exact same code, which, by the way, you can do the same, and then we'll explain it. All right, here we go. I am not a big fan of the misalignment in general. It makes me anxious. Okay, let's go and do this. Now I fixed it. All right, so same thing, we activate Stripe again. Of course, we don't have to change the API keys, the public keys and the secret keys anymore. We have them, they're in the .env, we're all using the same thing. And what we're gonna do is, of course, we are also, in this particular case, it's gonna go fetch the input again from the form, similarly to what we've done before, except that this time we are not gonna validate the inputs ourselves, okay? And we are not even gonna create the format ourselves. We're gonna use out of the box what you know, the payment view that that Calligraphy comes out with, which is using some of the Stripe components automatically. Okay, and that's all you need to do on the controller side. You don't even have to worry about anything else at this stage of the game, and even the view itself is already created for you. So notice over here that it's returning a view called payment, which is located in the default pages folder. So let me go and show you where this view is. So if we go to the views section, we go to default, which is really where this view is located, and we go to pages, there is a payment template in there. And if I go to the payment template, you will see that there's something that's already created for us, which we could use, and that already works beautifully and seamlessly with this code that we just wrote. Okay, all the information is or can already be fetched for us. So technically, all we need to do is just go and test it out. But now, in order to make sure that that this page is accessible, we need to create a route for it, right? So don't forget that each and every time we need to create a route for any controller that we create that we want to be accessible from an endpoint. So I'm going to say we called it pay card, and this time it's going to go to payment controller, and we called the command or the action, we called it pay card. All right, so let's go and give it a shot. I'm going to go to the exact same one, but instead of pay, I'm going to put pay card, and let's see what the result is. Something is happening. So this is the template that comes out of the box, which is using, if you compare it to some of the Stripe components, it's using somehow the Stripe componentry, except that it's being styled based on what Calligraphy typically comes out of the box with. So I'm going to use exactly the same credit card as before, which is the test card. Again, 42, 42, 42, 42. Okay, and then I'm gonna choose a date in the future with the year 2025, 25, CVC 123, and then the zip code here in the US, because that's what it typically asks for. I'm gonna use any you can use anything actually, so any number, just for any 4 numbers for the sake of the zip code. I'm gonna go ahead and pay. Sorry, it needs to be 5 in the US, so but it's good to see the types of error. It says your postal code is incomplete. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put 12355, so it needs to be 5 digits. I'm going to go ahead and pay and see what happens. And notice, payment succeeded. Now, let's go to our dashboard. Our 40 bucks here will need to go up to 50 bucks, I believe, because even then we created the transaction. Let's go back to the controller to really see what transaction we created. It's also 1,000 cents. Okay, so it's also $10. Notice that in order to create the payment transaction, we use what we call payment intents in Stripe, as opposed to the way we've done it before. And that payment intent is the value of it is 1,000 bucks. Okay. So let's go in here. It literally went up to 50 bucks, which is exactly the transaction that we just made. All right. So that was method number 2. Now let's go do method number 3. Method 3, and we'll come back to it. Now let's go to the documentation over here. Method 3 is a complete checkout flow that you do not have to worry about at all. It is completely hosted and completely controlled by Stripe itself. Okay, and configured by Stripe. So anything that you configure in the dashboard of Stripe would appear in your checkout flow. So you could accept more payment mechanisms if you would like. In this particular case, you can accept Apple Pay, you can accept Google Pay, you can accept some other types of wallets anywhere around the world, as well as in some cases ACH directly through Stripe itself without any third party involved. So all the mechanisms or all the payment methods that Stripe could support anywhere in the world would eventually be accessible to you using this checkout flow that is provided and powered by Stripe itself. So let me go ahead and show you how this is done. And it's exactly the same thing. We're going to take whatever is in this code over here, and we're going to copy the content of it directly in our new method, which is checkout flow. Okay, so I'm going to call it checkout for the purpose of this demo. I'll call it checkout like that. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and copy the code that we just saw in the documentation, and we're going to go line by line or bucket or part by part to explain this code. There's the first part to activate the Stripe account, similarly to what we've done before, and then at some point we need a way to go back to the URL where we called the checkout flow from. So the statement is exactly doing that. It's giving us the URL where where the checkout is being requested from. All right, and then there's this method that Caligraphy provides that directly links us to the creation of a checkout on the Stripe end, and it's a method that takes obviously the amount. In this case, notice it's going to be or at least the one from the code is $20 instead of 10. I'm going to change it. I'm going to put $10 in order for us not to get lost in our count. So it takes obviously the amount in cent. It takes the currency that you want to use, which in this case is USD, and then there are several other parameters that could be added to this whole thing, and a big part of it is what you want to append in an array over here. So let me go to the documentation to explain a little what else could be added to this method, and it's literally called create checkout. So you can add the amount, you can add the currency like we've mentioned. Of course, the one was for quantity, so by default we'll say it's just one. And the product data, that's the one that I really wanted to point out to you, and that's an array of things that you could add to the checkout flow. So what are those things? It could be if you want to add the receipt email, for example, of the customer's email. If you want to add the description, if you want to add change the success URL versus the cancel URL, if you want to change them, you could also append them to the parameters in here. But in terms of product data itself, there is definitely anything that you need to appear about the product. So it could be an image, and it could be things like this, which the complete set of it could be found on the Stripe API help. Okay, now for our scenario over here, what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to tell you some examples of things that could be added in here in the product data. So it could be the name, but another one could definitely be the description. Okay, so over here I'm going to add description, and I'm going to say, no, I don't know, it happens to be a t-shirt, so this is a beautiful t-shirt. Okay, just to show you how it's done. So I put an equal, it's not an equal, it's an array. Okay, so that's what this one does. It creates a checkout, and of course upon success we'll get back the ID. If nothing happens, then the session ID would go to null, and then once we have something, we'll return a view, and that view is also provided to you out of the box with Caligraphy, and it's called checkout, and it's exactly in the same spot as the other one that we just saw, except it changes a tiny little bit just because it's a checkout process, so you need a way to trigger it, which basically all this view is doing is it's calling, or it's showing a button that's called checkout, which would call, or which would redirect to the URL that this controller generates for us once we call the create checkout function. Okay, so that's, if you want the back, the back explanation, or the explanation of what's happening behind the scenes. So let's go ahead and try it out. But of course, before we do, what we need to do is to create, yet again, a route for it. So I'm going to say route get, and this time it's going to be called checkout, and we're going to be calling the payment controller at checkout, right? Because that's how we named our controller. And ideally, if we've done things correctly, this should do it for us. So now I'm going to go and say checkout, and let's see what happens when we do that. Here's our template, and there's a button which is the trigger for checking out. I'm going to go ahead and click it, and if everything goes well, we're going to start seeing the checkout flow, which is exactly what you're seeing right now. So that's the amount. It's the t-shirt. That's the name that we created. This is the amount, which happens to be $10. And this is the description that we put in our code, which says this is a beautiful t-shirt. And everything that you see on the right side is automatically done for us based on our configuration in Stripe, which is a very basic configuration that says what sort of payment mechanisms or methods you would like to include. In this particular case, we've included Google Pay or a card. And then that's that's exactly what the user would fill. So they would enter an email. So let me say test.test.com or something like that. I'm going to do 42, 42, 42, 42. We're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to put 05, 12, and then 25, and 1, 2, 3, name on card, call ourselves test. And then we're going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you want to add a phone number for the future, they have this mechanism for a secure one-click checkout later on. You could do that as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and initiate the payment and see what happens after we do that. It says processing, you're done, and then it will redirect you to the success URL, which in this case happens to be the URL where we triggered the checkout from. Now, if it all worked out, it went up. Our gross volume went up to $60, right? Another additional $10, which is exactly what we just did. Okay. And notice in this particular case, we also have one new customer, just from the fact that we've entered an email, and we've entered in our checkout process, and we've entered a name and an email, mainly an email. Then a new customer was automatically created in your account. Okay, so now if I go here, I look at customers. The latest one is called test, which is exactly the one that we just paid with. Okay. Now, of course, Stripe is an entire platform on its own. So it gives you a bunch of things, to do, to personalize, to configure. I would strongly advise that you use the mechanisms by Stripe as opposed to method number 1, which is completely something that you would create yourself. I would suggest you either use method number 2 or method number 3. All right, so with that, we would have seen today how to create a payment gateway using Calligraphy in 3 different methods. Method number 1 is a simple card form that you create, customize, and personalize on your own. Except it will not have the entire capabilities of validating cards outside of the U.S. and Canada, or even sometimes in the U.S. depending on the financial institution. It doesn't have all the mechanisms to validate 3D Secure, for example. Method number 2 is more of a global card payment that is completely validated by Stripe itself, and all that Calligraphy does is it provides the UI, the UI for it, but most of the validation is done through the Stripe mechanisms, and it could definitely encompass all different types of transactions around the world. Method number 3 is the most complete method, which completely uses a checkout flow from Stripe directly that needs to be configured through the Stripe website. and it could include any payment method that Stripe supports anywhere in the world. Using this method is definitely the most complete one. If you need to create a checkout flow that would work internationally everywhere with any form of payment beyond just credit cards, it could also include Google Pay, Apple Pay, Alipay, and other mechanisms that Stripe supports around the world, whether it through ACH, so banking transfers, or any other modality of payment. So with that, I hope this was helpful to you, and then we'll see you in the next tutorial.